few minutes at the end for you to do an evaluation. Just to sort of talk through some of these questions here on the slide. I'm really interested in what specific issues folks are grappling with and might need some assistance on. So I'll open it up to Steve's been monitoring the question board here. I'll hand it over.
All right, we'll try this. Just looking here. Yes, okay. There's one comment I wanted to make initially relative to something that Nicole said, and then there are three specific, actually two specific questions that I'll take from the list that have been submitted. The first was that Nicole said in her tips, don't put forward a proposal that's too far out, I think might be the word that she said. And I just wanted to emphasize that that's a relative term, the term of art. You know, there's a part of there, my own personal thought is that there are pretty far out as defined by creative proposals that ought to be put forward. And if they're focused on how we're going to make teachers teaching more readily available to kids different hours of the day, different locations, for different amounts of time during the year, if we're talking about trying to really alter the structure of the teaching profession, far-out ideas may make great sense. I think what I heard in her comments were putting forward things that are kind of blatantly disrespectful probably don't help the process. For example, if you know, you were hoping to get to a place of having teachers pay a little bit more on health insurance, which is a very reasonable proposal, and if the way to get there was to initially propose a 30% pay cut, so that there's if that was part of the original proposal, that's probably not helpful to the cause. But certainly I wouldn't mistake that tip as being discouraging in any way. Nicole, you want to respond to that?
Yeah, I would like to respond. And so I guess my point there is the bargaining table should not be the first time people are hearing of that proposal. So if you want to get creative about use of time, those conversations should have happened well in advance of coming to the table, so that when you do bring them up, they're not viewed as a far-out proposal, because everybody's already been really clear that that's the direction we need to move in. Okay.
Great, thanks. There were two specific questions, and I'd asked the individuals who raised them if they would be willing to share them directly. And it's a good thing we didn't rely on this, on full technology being available to everyone for this session, because the two folks that I asked to make the comments directly themselves don't have microphones. So I will ask on their behalf. Richard Mills raised one of these questions, and I don't know which board Richard is from. If you want to send me a little note about that, I could mention it. But he asked the question, I hope I understand it, which is why I was hoping that he could share it with us directly. But he asked whether when you're calculating staff raises, et cetera, are there other ideas on calculating those other than simply tenure? Now, if I didn't, in other words, most systems are set up as if you've been in your job a certain amount of time, you get a certain number of you're on a certain step, and with certain degrees you go across the grid, and that's largely the way we pay our teachers in the state. And he's asking the question: are there other models? And he's from Dummerston. Thank you, Richard. I was going to make one quick response to that, but others may have ideas on that as well. One of the objectives that the VSBA is putting forward is that a lot of folks have expressed interest in having a more flexible profession where people can come in and out of the teaching profession. It is structured so that people come into it when they're young, and we start people off at a fairly modest salary. And then if you stay with it long enough, you begin to earn a reasonable, a salary and have a strong retirement plan. It's really designed to get people into the profession and have them stay for a very long time. And a lot of people have said, well, what about people who've had other careers and who are well suited to assist students in this new world that we've created, and who have particular expertise in certain kinds of endeavors in the community or with technology or whatever? Wouldn't it be great to be able to attract people like that into the profession? Or people who are a teacher for a period of time, leave the profession for a period of time, want to come back, and are penalized significantly for the fact that they weren't with it for the entire time. So we certainly would encourage people to work in their negotiations around that kind of issue. We were talking about this in one location, and somebody from a local tech center said tech centers have figured this out. In fact, many of the things we're talking about, tech centers have figured out quite a while ago. And the individual who was there said that he had worked in industry for a long period of time and then had come into teaching, and they basically, the structure of that contract gave credit for that experience. So it wasn't like he was a starting teacher, he was considered to be an experienced teacher. So there are some examples, but certainly predominantly these decisions are made, you know, the norm is certainly the length of tenure of the teacher. If anybody has anything else they want to share on that front, you could raise your hand, Carrie's looking, or you can send a note in the question box. I'm going to move on to the next question, and again, we'll jump back to you if there's others that want to come forward. Patrick Healy, and Patrick, remind me of what district you're from. He asked the question about what is our advice on public negotiations, and Patrick is from Marshfield. He's on the Twinfield School Board. Thanks, Patrick. And I'm assuming you're talking about the advice on negotiating in open session. And I'm going to look to Nicole and see if she has any advice on that. Certainly, we've heard people recommending that, but I don't know if she has any particular suggestions.
Well, I don't have particular advice other than to say that presented this workshop a version of this workshop a week ago at our conference at Lake Warrior. I was with a veteran attorney who represents school districts in bargaining, and this issue came up, and his response was having negotiations outside, you know, in executive session, essentially, allows for parties to float ideas without fear of sort of public evaluation in real time. And his analysis was that that's good for both parties. It's healthy for the process. I've certainly talked with a number of boards that have felt the opposite to be true. And I'd say it's really an assessment that you all need to make together, but that it's something that I imagine you're going to have to get the teachers to agree to. So it should come out of, it may be that the end result of a strong foundation setting process that you've done as a board to bring people to a place where they're ready to have these conversations in open session. But if you haven't done that work of building relationships, building consensus about the direction you want to move in, I imagine it's going to be pretty tough to convince the parties to have that discussion in open session.
We have a hand being raised by Henry from Lincoln. So Henry, do you want to offer a question or a suggestion?
Yeah, I was just going to mention that we tried to have our negotiations in open session. They were so orchestrated that the real horse trading happened in executive session, with the board talking in their little private caucus and the teachers talking in their little private caucus, and then we got together to share the results of those conversations. And if they had been in open session, I think we would have avoided a lot of unrealistic starting positions. but the teachers didn't want to do that.
Uh-huh.
So anyway, I realize there are some problems, but the whole process is so ritualized and adversarial now that having it open, I think, is, at least in our supervisory union, is a good thing. They would be less good if we were actually talking together rather than steady positions.
Great. Thanks. Paul Hatch. Paul, first of all, which board are you from, if you could send me a note? And the other is, do you have a microphone? If you could answer me those two questions, and I might just have you ask the question. I'm sorry? Henry's hands up again. Okay, hold on one second. I'm looking to see if Paul, all right, Paul, if you can send me, oh, there he is right there. He's from Franklin Northeast and Berkshire, and he does not have a mic, so I'm going to ask his question for him, and then I'll come back to Henry. Let's see. The question is, my suspicion is that the Union Bargaining Council represents the more radical members of the association. What are our limitations in providing what is really going on in the negotiations process? We have found misinformation being given to the local association. You did mention this, but Nicole, you want to add anything to that whole question about, you know, once you're in this mode?
Yeah, I think there are two things. One is you need to pay attention to what your ground rules say, if anything, about communicating with the other party. And number two, if they don't say anything, then the Labor Board has stated that you can communicate directly with the employees, but you have to be careful that it's not done in such a way as to undermine the authority of the union to represent its employees, and I think I also said the communications can't be coercive or promise any sort of benefit from backing down from a particular union proposal. So if you're contemplating communicating directly with employees and you're represented by counsel, that's a situation where I would strongly urge you to get the advice of your attorney and review any communications you plan to send out from the board.
We have time for maybe one more question. If let's see, agreed to give the press. Any other any other additional question or comment on any different subjects? If any hands up there, okay. I think well, you should explain how we're going to handle these the various. We have a number of questions and comments here that we have not specifically responded to as of yet, but you'll explain that, right?
Okay. I'm going to explain that. Well, first of all, I want to thank everybody for taking the time to join us this evening and for participating in the discussion. I want to leave you with a few resources or suggestions for resources. I've mentioned the collective bargaining guide, and I've mentioned your school district's attorney in passing, but that's really an important resource for boards, particularly those who are embarking on SU-wide bargaining for the first time. It's a very complex situation and really should rely on the advice of legal counsel because it can be very important as you embark upon that process. We also have communication supports for boards experiencing difficulties in the collective bargaining process, and I am the contact person for all collective bargaining supports from the VSBA. My contact information is on the screen there. when you close out of the webinar, you're going to be automatically directed to an evaluation form. Please take a minute or two to fill that out. It's really important for us to know what works and what doesn't, and what information you're going to find helpful as you move forward, not just with collective bargaining, but with all the work that you do. Carrie should be sending out an email with a link to this video in the next day or so. That will include a list of all the questions that were asked during the session, in addition to our responses. And am I missing anything else? Okay. Yeah. Here comes Steve.
Okay. This totally screws up the system when we go back and forth. Richard just asked a great question about, and unfortunately our time's up, so we could skate on it. But no, it's probably the question of the hour: looming healthcare bill and its potential effect on contracts. My only advice to you is, first of all, I would tell you that we are deeply involved in discussions of the current situation right now with the business managers, with the Superintendents Association, with the various attorneys involved in this situation, trying to understand exactly where things stand. My only advice to boards would be, at this point, not to jump into something where they're locking in an obligation for a long period of time. We will be trying to get you very good information in the very near future. You know, I'd say within the month. We'll be trying to get you some very, very clear, like the 5 most important things you need to know about healthcare. But as of this moment in time, if you're in the middle of something, and most people are not, but you know, most people aren't close to settling. But I would say buy yourself some time on that one, because the landscape is evolving as we speak.
Okay. That concludes our program for the evening. Thank you so much, and please feel free to contact me with any questions, comments, or concerns. I look forward to hearing from you. Good night.